And tonight in The Future of Everything, by now, if you see this video, you know exactly what people are going to start talking about, UFOs, and that is what this new book is all about, imminent, inside the Pentagon's hunt for UFOs. But what you might not know is the guy who wrote this book is actually the guy behind those videos being declassified and released for the world to see. Luis Elizondo is a former high-ranking DOD insider who was so frustrated with what he says or attempts to cover up information about UFOs that he was the one who was working behind the scenes to get those images to the public in 2017, and in this new book, he's got stories that will make those videos look like nothing. And Luis Elizondo joins us now. Lou, thank you so much for being with us. You and I have been talking about this for years, and I got to say, our audience is pretty far ahead of the curve, so we can jump straight in. But there is a lot in this book that, like, immediately raised my eyebrows. Like, you never told me that you were trained as a remote viewer. That's like men who stare at goat-style, psychically trained spy stuff, right?
Well, you know, it certainly seems that way, but in reality, the U.S. government has a long history and affinity with basically any type of capability to spy or get the advantage on our adversaries. And remote viewing was actually started by one of my colleagues, Dr. Hal Puthoff, back in the late 60s and early 70s, using at the time, Stanford University with the CIA to actually create a psychic espionage program called Stargate. Had other names as well before, but Stargate is perhaps the most famous name of that program.
And Lou, Stargate got shut down, and yet in your book you say that other countries are probably still using some of these psychic abilities, I guess for a lack of a better word there, and some of our trained soldiers, including you, were also are possibly using them. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. Even today in law enforcement, I know it sounds kind of kooky, but psychics have been used to a great deal of success. I think the rub here is that when people say, you know, psychic espionage and whatnot, they think of the woo factor. But in reality, a lot of scientists now believe that capability is really part of the human consciousness, the brain aspect, which is maybe tied to quantum mechanics and frankly, quantum entanglement. So we may not be talking about really anything science fiction, but really just advanced science fact.
I don't want to eat into the time on UFOs because that's also possibly the biggest existential question ever. In your book, you say you could write a book about remote viewing. So we're going to circle back. We'll have you on just to talk about all that. But let's just jump straight into some of the biggest things that stuck out from this book. You say one of the first conversations you had with Hal, you were told that Roswell was real and it was covered up, and there were 4 non-human bodies recovered from that crash. So if that happened, where are the bodies? Where is the craft? And how many more bodies and crafts do you think the government has?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the bodies were taken initially to a military installation, and then from there, it gets a little murky. A lot of people don't know that there are actually 2 crashes initially in 2 events that occurred in Roswell. And to put this on a very quick backdrop, Roswell is where we located our B-29 bombers that were specifically outfitted right after we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to carry an atom bomb. And it was one of the only air bases, frankly, in the world at the time where these aircraft were stationed. And we know that UAP have had an affinity both to our nuclear capabilities and our military capabilities.
I'm from New Mexico, so I grew up with this lore. And in your book, you kind of talk about the possibility that, you know, maybe these crashes were happening in New Mexico because of the beginning of the dawn of the nuclear age and EMP pulses, and maybe that messed with the craft. Is that right?
Yeah, so the current theory is that we were testing a particular device out there, and it happened to interfere with the propulsion units of these UAP. And again, I know it sounds crazy, but it appears that is exactly what happened. And the U.S. government, as a result, was able to recover one of these vehicles and hide it away.
Now, so much of this tracks with what David Grush testified to in front of Congress. Everybody was watching that. But then when we pressed him on specifics, other people have pressed him on specifics, he always says he can't provide them because they are classified, in Roswell in particular. But your book, you also had to go through a year-long DOD review process. But, like, I got to ask, why didn't they redact the Roswell stuff or a lot of the other specifics from your book?
Yeah, Gadi, can't tell you that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. Really, because once you write something, it becomes indelible, becomes part of the record. And I knew that because I hold a current security clearance, I'd have to go through the official review process, which almost took a year. That's a pretty long time. And even then, when I got the book back, there's still redactions. In fact, if you look at the book now, you will see blacked out areas that the government was not very happy with me discussing. And so they thought it was too sensitive. But David Grush, I can tell you for a fact, he is 100% legitimate. I actually worked with him. I can't say specifically where, but we were colleagues. And what he is telling the American people is only a fraction of what he actually knows.
Speaking of the Pentagon not being happy with some of the stuff that you've been talking about, the Pentagon has said they've looked into crash retrievals and under the office that they have right now, and they've found no substantiated evidence of any of this existing. When you see those statements coming out from the DOD right now, what's your reaction?
My statement is try harder. The bottom line is we know they're there. And we also know that the Pentagon never lies, right? Except for Pentagon Papers and Iran-Contra, and the list goes on and on. The bottom line is that the U.S. government is very well aware of this since the end of the 40s and even during the 1940s, during World War II with the Foo Fighters, where our Allied pilots were actually encountering UFOs while in combat. So this is nothing new for the U.S. government. And people look at our program, ATIP and OSAP, and they say, oh, well, that's the first program. It wasn't. There's a long succession of UFO programs, officially sanctioned UFO programs that the government has been involved with for decades. And I think that's something the American people should know.
And talking about what the American people should know and what's true and what's not, I mean, in your book, you were alleging that UAPs can hurt people, and you even describe reports of people being burned, people possibly dying, alien implants that have been removed from human bodies. Those are terrifying things to read about. And yet, what is the evidence?
So keep in mind that our program was really focused on military eyewitness accounts, military capabilities like gun camera footage and radar footage. We weren't really interested in the civilian data too much, at least not my effort. These anecdotes where grandma maybe saw some lights in the backyard, that wasn't our focus. We're talking about trained military observers with some of the best, most capable, sophisticated technologies that's out there, radar, gun camera footage, and other capabilities I really can't talk about, all collecting information at the same place, at the same time, under the same circumstances, saying that's a real thing. And by the way, it can outperform anything we have in our inventory.
And Lou, I got to say, if I was a government-trained spy that had possible psychic abilities and was able to remote view, and I was looking into all this stuff, like one of the first things I would probably do, especially even if I left the government, was to sit down, use whatever abilities I had to remote view myself into a UFO. Have you done that?
No, and frankly, I never said I was a good remote viewer. I was taught early on some techniques by one of the top Army's remote viewers. Wonderful gentleman, very, very gifted. Sadly, I was not that gifted, but it turns out that a lot of people have that capability. And it's really, I think, once you talk to some of the scientists, you realize it's not paranormal like people suggest it is. It's probably just some sort of latent capability that humans have had for a very long time before we really were able to verbalize communication with one another, and it became very sophisticated. Dogs, for example, when they come across and they see each other, there's some sort of nonverbal communication, and some scientists are speculating maybe that's a form of, we call it psychic, but in reality, it's just a normal part of human interactions, and a lot of people can do it.
Lou, we didn't even get into the orbs that have been harassing you and your family. I mean, there's so much other stuff in this book. So I hope you'll be back on the show. We really do want to delve as deeply into this as we possibly can. But for now, Lou, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Gadi, my honor and privilege, and thank you for doing what you do.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or follow us on social media.